When you think of palm trees, you probably picture a tropical paradise, right? But for growers, they're a massive global industry. And lurking just out of sight, in the soil, the water, even the air, is a hidden enemy, microscopic pathogens waging a silent war. So today, we're going to crack open their playbook. We'll figure out exactly how they attack, and more importantly, how we can build a solid defense.
And just look at this. The stakes couldn't be higher. On one side, you've got a lush, thriving grove. That's the goal, right? Full of life, full of profit. But on the other side, total devastation. That's what happens when a disease tears through. We're talking the difference between a successful season and complete loss. And it all comes down to knowing what you're up against.
And we're not just talking about a backyard tree here and there. Think about this. Globally, we're producing something like 62 million tons of coconuts every single year. That is a gigantic industry. It supports entire communities, entire economies. So protecting these palms, it's not just a local problem, it's a global one.
Okay, so let's get to it. To build a defense, you first have to know your enemy. So we're going to profile 3 of the main culprits out there. Think of them as our most wanted. And trust me, each one has a very different way of operating.
First up, we've got the fungus, Ganoderma. This one's a classic soil-borne villain. It causes what's called basal stem rot, and the signs are pretty dramatic. You might see this reddish-brown liquid literally oozing out of the bottom of the trunk. Then, this hard, shelf-like thing called a fungal bracket forms. Now, when you see that bracket, it's bad news. It's basically a sign that the tree's internal plumbing is completely breaking down.
All right, next on our list is something called an oomycete, or a water mold. Now, this one's a bit of a trickster. It looks and acts like a fungus, but it's technically not. It's a pseudofungus. A good example is Phytophthora palmivora, which causes bud rot. As the name water mold suggests, it absolutely loves wet monsoon-like conditions, and it goes straight for the kill, attacking the palm's central growing point, its heart really. For a young palm, an attack like this is pretty much game over.
And our third attacker is a whole different ballgame. It's a phytoplasma. This is a super weird wall-less type of bacteria that causes something called Tadipaka disease. You can think of this one like a spy or an internal saboteur. It lives inside the plant's vascular system, the phloem that moves all the sugars around. And how does it get in? It hitches a ride on an insect. It's basically a stowaway. This causes a slow, miserable decline for the tree. And here's the really tough part, there's no cure. So you can see, we're not fighting just one type of enemy. It's a whole army. And each soldier has a different attack plan.
So, we've met the bad guys. Now, let's get into their strategy. We're going to break down the playbook for Ganoderma step by step. Let's call it its infection engine.
So the whole playbook boils down to 4 main stages. First, it has to survive in the soil and debris. Second, it needs a way to enter the plant, usually through a wound. Third comes the internal decay, where it does all the damage. And finally, the release of its spores to spread. Now let's look at that whole cycle visually.
Okay, here's the whole infection engine laid out. So stage 1, the fungus is just hanging out, dormant in the soil, hiding in old bits of root and junk. Then stage 2, it finds a way in, maybe a small wound on a root or at the base of the trunk. That's its open door. Stage 3 is when things get ugly. It gets inside and just starts eating away at the tree's tissue from the inside out. And then, finally, stage 4. Remember that fungal bracket we talked about? That's what releases the spores, spreading the infection to new trees, and boom, the whole cycle starts over.
All right, so we understand the attack, but just knowing the playbook isn't enough, right? We have to figure out how to break that cycle. So now, let's shift gears and talk defense. And this isn't about just randomly spraying stuff and hoping for the best. It's about being smart, finding the weak spots in that playbook, and hitting them where it hurts.
So let's put on our strategist hats for a second. If this is their playbook, where are the weak points? Where are the vulnerabilities? At what stage can we actually jump in and stop this whole engine from running? I mean, that's really the core question in all of disease management.
And here's how we do it. We take their own playbook and turn it against them. See? Each stage of that cycle has a strike point, a place where we can intervene. So at the survival stage, we strike with good old-fashioned field sanitation, clean up the debris. At the entry stage, we protect the tree from injuries and make sure the drainage is good. During the decay stage, if we catch it early, we can try to intervene with treatments. And at the release stage, we have to remove those infected palms to stop the spread of spores.
Let's break that down into some actual tactics for Ganoderma. Physically, that means getting infected palms out of there and even digging trenches to isolate the area. Culturally, it's about good practices, improving drainage, being careful not to injure the roots during work. And then there's the biological approach, where we can actually introduce good microbes, like Trichoderma, to fight the bad guys right there in the soil. See, it's a full-on, multi-pronged attack.
Okay, so that sounds like a pretty solid plan for a soil-based fungus like Ganoderma. But here's the plot twist. What if the attacker doesn't play by these rules at all? What happens when the enemy isn't even in the soil to begin with?
Well, this is the playbook for Tatapaca disease. And look at the huge difference. This pathogen doesn't care about the soil. Its entire game plan revolves around an insect, a vector. An insect bites an infected plant, picks up the phytoplasma, flies over to a healthy plant, and injects it. The soil? It's totally irrelevant. It's not part of the equation.
And that, of course, completely flips our defense strategy on its head. Treating the soil would be a total waste of time and money, right? The pathogen is inside the plant, and remember, it's incurable. So the absolute key is vector control. You have to manage the insect population. That means things like targeted sprays, making sure you start with disease-free seedlings, and clearing out any weeds that the insect might use as a hideout. So we've looked at two very different attackers, and they each need a totally unique defensive plan. This all leads us to the single most important idea in modern disease management, what we call an integrated strategy.
And here it is. This is basically the golden rule. It's called Integrated Disease Management, or IDM for short. And the whole idea is that there is no silver bullet. There's no one magic cure. Instead, it's about being smart and combining everything in your toolbox: cultural practices, biological controls, and yes, chemical methods, to build a defense that's not just effective, but also sustainable in the long run.
So let's just do one final recap side by side. You've got Ganoderma, the fungus. Its attack method is soil-borne, so your primary defense is sanitation and managing the soil. Then you have Tatapaca, the phytoplasma. Its attack is vector-borne, so your primary defense has to be controlling that insect vector. Same crop, two totally different playbooks, and two totally different defenses. Look, understanding your enemy's strategy is always the first step to winning any battle. Once you decode that pathogen's playbook, you can design a defense that's way smarter and way more effective. So the real question to ask isn't just, what's attacking my palms? It's, okay, now that I know their playbook, how am I going to write my defense?